You're listening to the All Things Private Practice podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Casal in Asheville, North Carolina. And today I feel so grateful to have Jill Johnson Young on. She is out in California, grief specialist extraordinaire, all things grief essentially, has a group practice of 37 therapists, does speaking, education, courses, all of the grief stuff. Makes a really hard, challenging topic fun to talk about. So Jill, I'm really happy to have you on here.
I'm so glad I could be here. I love getting to know you on Maui, and it's awesome to be around your people.
Thank you. And I really consider you one of my people. Ever since we shared a meal in Maui, I'm like, I love Jill. I listened to Jill speak at Ernesto Segismundo's conference in Maui, and I'm like, I'm sold. I could listen to Jill talk about grief all day. And this is a topic for a lot of people that feels taboo and uncomfortable. And we're going to talk about your journey to get to where you are at currently. I'm just going to turn it over to you and just tell us about entering private practice and where this journey has kind of taken you along the way.
It's been kind of a wild ride, which I think it probably is for a lot of private practice owners. I thought we were just going to own a small little, just the two of us practice. We opened our practice in the middle of the recession in 2010, which is always a wise time to invest money and open a business that
Absolutely.
You don't. And I was a social worker for the county and for hospice. I never dreamed I'd open a business. And then there we were. It was just a few months after my first wife had died. And then we started in this nasty little office that had only walk upstairs, and they were totally not to code. And I'm so glad we're nice, big, beautiful offices now, plural, that have nice areas that you can sit outside, although I haven't been to mine in a year and a half now because of COVID. But the practice started right after Linda died. And my focus at that point was on child welfare and foster kids, because that's where we had both come out of. My business partner, Sherry Shockey Pope. And we just wanted to make therapists do better with our little people because they were being labeled as having reactive attachment disorder just because they were adopted or in foster care. So we went on sort of a little speaking gig thing across the state to try and train therapists to do that. And I went, oh, this is fun. I enjoy doing this. I like public speaking anyway, because I'm political. So it's always fun to go to city council and whatever. And then I gradually morphed my side away from kids and into grief and loss, because as a therapist, I brought my hospice work in, and I love doing end of life work. I love giving people the freedom to make end of life what it needs to be. I was very blessed to be able to walk my first wife out through her illness, and she was sick for a very long time with pulmonary fibrosis caused by breast cancer and chemo. And I knew that I wanted to do something with that, but I couldn't work for hospice anymore. We worked 2 jobs for a while, and I just needed to get off the road. I had a stroke. I needed to not drive all day long. So I shaved my part of the practice into grief and loss, death and dying, dementia, all the fun stuff, right?
Right.
Which my business partner does not enjoy. That is not, she's a practice builder. She's EMDR. She's definitely not grief and loss. So it was my safe space. I enjoyed doing it. I had time because I had a private practice to write the books I wanted to write. So I wrote some children's books that I wished I'd had as a hospice provider about expecting a death and after a death and pet death. And then I decided I needed to write a workbook because I didn't have any materials to work with that made sense to me. I'm very oriented towards solution focused and towards making grief a time of growth and changing up your life the way you wanted to. In the middle of that, I went to the Grief Recovery Institute for a long weekend because in between all of this, my second wife, who I married, had died. So Linda was my first wife. She became friends with my soon-to-be second wife, who was her hospice nurse, and told us to marry. And then she developed Lewy body dementia, and then she died. And now I'm married to a funeral director who took care of both of them. So that's Jill in a nutshell. I've walked the walk, folks. When I'm doing this, it's both personal and professional perspective. It's research-based, it's practice-based, it's Jill-based, boots on the ground.
What does Jill-based mean? Because like for people who don't yet know you, you make a topic like that story that you just shared, you know, that everything is interconnected.
Yes.
And you're so open to talk about it and this experience. Was that ever a challenge?
You know, there's such a bias in the therapist community about not being open. Don't share your stuff. Don't tell people about it. Write the book for kids. That way you're not talking about yourself. And my website stuff didn't talk about me having had losses. people could still find me because my obituaries were up. So they would track me down that way. They'd Google and they'd find me that way and they'd come in. And I was working with Joe Muirhead and she's like, Jill, people need to know you. And I said, Joe, you're not supposed to talk about yourself. We have rules, right? Empty chair and blank page and all that. We have rules. And she said, yeah, that's just bullshit. And so in her usual Joe way. And I don't think she used that word. She used some kind of Australian term for it, but that's what the translation was, right?
Absolutely.
And so she said, just try being open about you. And I had to talk it through with my business partner who was like, yeah, we're not supposed to really share a lot about ourselves. And I said, I really am going to dive deep on this. And so I started really working on making grief who I was and what I talked about and what I trained on, and introducing myself as having been there and done that. All of a sudden, it became therapists were able to listen to me because I wasn't just talking theory. I was talking about end of life happens, and here's a picture of my first wife in bed, right?
Yeah.
At the end of someone's death, when it's an intimate partner, that emptiness in that bed is huge. And so I've been able to bring in new topics as I've grown as a speaker and as hopefully now becoming an influencer in grief and loss, into talking about the things that I run into with my clients and the experiences they're having. So I've now developed a specialty in intimate partner loss and making hospices and therapists talk about it, because they don't like to talk about death, dying, grief, loss, or sex. None of that is in the inbox.
All
right?
All taboo, all uncomfortable,
all the bad.
Right. Yeah. But an absolute part of life, and
you would hope
inevitable.
So.
You would hope so, right? All of those things go together. And so your willingness to dive deep and be real and be authentic was kind of probably against the norm at that time as you're developing this. And you start to talk about topics that are pretty polarizing. I remember listening to you speak in Maui, and I was like, this is one of the best speaker performances I've ever seen because of the authenticity, because of how willing you were to just share your own story and journey with grief and loss. So Joe Muirhead tells you to be real. You are telling your partner, your business partner, that you're considering doing that. There's some maybe resistance there because it's not the norm at the time. Then what happens?
Then I just dove deep and I did it, but it was super uncomfortable. And I kept watching for feedback, right? I was almost addicted to social media, going, all right, who's saying bad things about me? Who's arguing with me? And there were arguments, right?
Totally.
You get in some of those big groups right now and you say, you should be authentic. You should share your story. And the attack is on, right?
Absolutely.
I'm reporting you. Your license is toast. How dare you share that? And my reaction started to become, it's what my clients want.
Yes.
It's what they need. And if you're not doing it, that's why you're not seeing them.
Absolutely. And I don't think we can go as deep with our clients if we're not willing to go deep ourselves. For clients who are struggling with end of life and partner loss and pet loss and all of the losses and grief that comes with it, those clients need that support. They need to feel understood and seen and validated. They need to know that you get it, and you definitely get it.
They don't necessarily need to hear like the details. They don't want to know what your story meant, but they need to know. And they will call and say, I'm going to wait to see you because you've been there. Now, some of them call and say, I want to see you because you're older, and then I want to cry. But you're of a certain age now, Jill.
Is that why the blue streak in the hair still exists?
That's exactly why it's there. I will have a blue streak in my hair until they take me out, right? But I haven't decided how I'm going to be taken out yet because there's so many options these days, right?
Which
is fun to talk about too, right? I don't think I want the hydrolysis thing. I don't think I want to be melted, but maybe the rattan basket would be fun, done in teal, right?
I like that you're thinking about this stuff though, because this is the stuff that people think about, but they feel shame to bring it up. They feel like they're going to be imposing or making their own therapists uncomfortable if they talk about death and dying and loss.
They won't talk about most of the topics related to death and dying and grief and loss. And they won't talk about a lot of stuff related to dementia either. They won't talk about it because so much of it is intimate. They won't talk about the fact that they want after-death contact with their loved one. And yet 80% do. And 60% find a practitioner to help them with it. And 100% won't tell their therapist. They will tell me, but they won't tell others because they think you're going to think I'm some kind of freak, or I'm in denial, or any of those other things, when in fact, it's the norm for grievers. They want to come in and say, I just miss laying in bed naked next to my loved one.
Sure.
And they're not going to say that to the average therapist because that therapist, as far as they know, has never even lost their pet rock, right?
Absolutely.
And
So
they
it
know that
sounds
I've buried two wives. So they know that I understand that feeling.
for sure. So it creates almost instantaneous rapport, maybe without even meeting you. So when they're reading your bio, they're reading your content, they see your name out there, they already know Jill gets it. I can be vulnerable with her because she gets it. She's been there. This experience has happened to her before, and she's willing to talk about it.
Right. And I'm willing to talk about all the different parts of grief. If I'm doing something about children's grief, I will talk about the kids that I've worked with. I will talk about going to the mortuary with a group of second graders and making pictures for their teacher who's laying in the casket. I will
Yeah,
talk about those things because that's real life. And it's not a real life part that most of us want to do. There are a lot of us who won't even go to funerals. Oh, no, that's uncomfortable for me. Yeah, no,
absolutely.
this is post COVID. You're going to all the funerals. Nobody gets a pass now.
No. And you're
Just
absolutely
saying.
right. This is real life. This is real
Hmm.
life. And normalizing the fact that this is a part of real life is really powerful. And it's got to be somewhat controversial at times, like you said. So it brings up a lot of shit for people. It brings up a lot of their own anxieties and panic and fear. And
Yeah.
we need to be able to discuss things that are challenging, that are difficult, because our clients are going through it. And if we can't do that, then we need to refer them to someone who can.
I was being interviewed by someone from a local NPR station. She said, you know, your book has a sense of humor, even though you're talking about grief. I'm like, well, of course it does, because grievers want to have a sense of humor. That's how we get through this stuff. She said, and you're really kind of open about stuff that happened to you. Are therapists supposed to do that? Well, actually, if you ask someone in grad school, you'll probably be told no.
Right.
But that's something we need to deprogram. And it is something we need to. And when I do speaking gigs, sometimes people will come up and say, isn't it weird working with clients if they know your story? Should you have done that? There's still that kind of feedback occurring. And now I can just say, you know what? If a client finds me and comes to me because they've read my story, it's because that means something to them and it gives them a sense of control or agency or you're going to get me. And I'm glad to do that for them. Right.
Such a powerful way to walk alongside a client is to do that for them and to be open and vulnerable yourself. I think that also creates light at the end of the tunnel to some degree and hope and optimism that you can work through it.
And that's what they'll say. I see you and you're out there and you are smiling and you're bubbly when you do things in community. And I know you've buried two people. Actually, I've buried a lot more, but those two in particular.
Right.
And they'll say, I want to be able to do that. And I can say, look, if you work with me and we do the process and it's a process that works for you, you'll be there too. You probably won't be doing what I'm doing, but you're going to be doing something. And we're going to find a way to make your loved one's memory stay alive so you can continue to keep them out there in the community as part of your life. And you're going to feel better. It's not magic. It's going to hurt. There are going to be some really suckish days and nights, but we're going to get you to the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. That's got to be so uplifting for people going through such a hellacious, painful process too. And you mentioned, it doesn't ever go away. That grief, that's always there, right? To some extent, it just might not be as painful most of the time.
The way I look at grief is the grief is when you do the work and then you recover and you still miss them occasionally. There are still
Yeah,
grief attacks. You got to pull the car over. When I'm talking to a griever on the phone the first time and they say, I have to pull the car over. Like, of course you do. Everybody does. And you're female, so you cry in the shower too, right? So people won't hear you. Like, how did you know? Because we all do that. Because we're trained not to show our emotions because we're taking care of everyone else, right?
right.
So, yeah, there's all kinds of things that if you can be vulnerable and share with your clients and not get weird about it and think someone's going to call the licensing police on you, you can actually make it a better experience for your client. And you can
For
teach other
sure.
therapists that it's okay to talk about yourself and you still fit in the community. You don't have to stick with stages and that you've got to do the stages and then we'll be all better. And you don't got to do that. You can listen to my grammar today. Can you tell I've been talking all morning?
You've been recording all day. I've been talking. I get it. I totally get it. I'll stumble over my words right now. That's why I'm being quiet.
I've been going since 8, which is unusual for me anyway. I'm not a morning person, but I want to make sure that if I'm going to be authentic, it's going to also set an example for other people to be,
Yeah,
because there are so many of us who just feel like, okay, when I walk into my office, I shut the door. I'm just going to be all the client needs and I'm going to do that, but I'm going to be Jill in the meantime. and I'm going to
Yeah.
smile and I'm going to laugh and I'm probably going to use foul language because that's kind of how it works when you're doing grief work and working with people with coping with dementia. And there's flashback for that too, because there's lots of therapists who think, cussing is very taboo. You shouldn't do it,
I think we're starting to really hopefully move away from this era of psychotherapy where you have to be that blank slate, where you have to be robotic, where you're just supposed to nod and smile and never show emotion or share your story. And I hope that we can continue to empower therapists to share a little bit because, again, we're selling relational work and we're supporting people through their journeys. They want to know that they're not alone. And
Right.
you showing up in this way for them in such a hard, challenging, painful time in their lives allows them to know they're not alone. And what more could you do than just show up in that authentic way?
And just be able to hold the space and not need to say all the things that people don't want to hear because it's too painful to listen to their story, which is
What
the
are
other
those
thing
things?
therapists do. Oh, good God.
You have a list. I know you have.
I have a
I know you hear a lot
5-page
of.
list.
Right. So what are some of the hits of like,
The
don't say this
highlights.
to grief clients?
Don't say, aren't you glad they're out of pain, or that their
Oh,
illness is over, or they're in a better place. Don't tell kids, well, you should be glad that at least daddy's able to watch over you as an angel, because that kid's going to be thinking in their head, I wish it was your daddy that was dead and was an angel because I want mine back.
right.
And if you're telling me that he's watching over me, I'm not going to pee tonight because that's going to be weird, right? Or I'm not going to go to bed if you tell them they went to sleep instead of that they died. They hear things like, well, it must be such a relief. Or, well, you're young enough to get married again. Right? They don't say that to me anymore. They're a little afraid to say those words. And my new wife is very grateful for that.
Right. Sure.
She wants to stay on this side of the dirt. But
Understandably so.
right, they say things like they want to know how someone died. Tell me the specifics. Stop it. If they wanted to share it with you, they would. Don't probe. You're not
What
the
does
therapist.
this stuff do to their experiences when clients are hearing things like that from loved ones or friends or colleagues?
It shuts them down and it pisses them off.
Yeah.
Right. I saw 2 therapists, one after each wife died. Both of them used the miracle question, which, I mean, you just don't have that power, folks. We're therapists. We cannot bring people back to life,
Right.
Not even with
Absolutely.
the best of Tinkerbell. And don't ask why they did this or why they did that, because that implies judgment.
Sure.
But when they hear, they're in a better place, that they have never had a loss.
Right. So you're experiencing these losses with wives back to back, and each therapist asks the miracle question. How do you respond to that therapist? Do you instantly shut down and think in your head, I'm not coming back here?
I made instantly the decision I wasn't coming back.
Yep.
But being the typical me, I just said, are you Tinkerbell? Right? You don't have that. You do not have that power. Right? Not even Mary Poppins could pull them out of her purse. They are dead. They are in boxes. And besides that, after my second wife died, I'd be a bigamist, and that would be really awkward. Right?
Yeah.
And then she
that's
said,
not what
well,
you needed at that time.
Right. And she said, aren't you glad they'll be waiting for you? I'm like, do you consider that there might be a traffic jam when I die? Because
I imagine you made her very uncomfortable.
I did. She never wanted to see me again either. I collect antique poodles who die. I'm going to have a crowd. Right?
Yeah.
So that's okay. But don't tell me to be glad for that, because then I know that you haven't had that experience with that kind of loss. And that just shuts it down. You don't have to have had the same loss as a client to be a really accurate, on-target, helpful therapist, but you have to acknowledge you've had a loss.
So in those situations, I know you're training newer therapists to deal and process grief and do it in a way that is actually therapeutic. What are some responses and ways to handle difficult situations like that instead of the miracle question or the, aren't you glad they're no longer in pain, or whatever the case may be?
Therapeutic silence goes a long way. If someone's telling their story, let them tell their story. If it takes 3 sessions and you never get to ask about family medical history, let them tell their story, for God's sakes. Do make sure that you send them out to the doctor and get, basic labs, and you make sure they're healthy after such an experience. But just let them tell their story. Ask them what stuff they heard from other people that's not helpful. They will give you their list and you can add it to yours.
That's great advice. And I think the power of therapeutic silence gets lost when the therapist is uncomfortable. The therapist has to jump in. I have to say something because I am uncomfortable with sitting here right now with what's coming up.
Or I'm defending against remembering my own losses that I haven't finished. And
how many therapists haven't done their own fucking work out there? I mean, we're in this field a lot of the times for the wrong reasons. So that, I think that's great advice. And don't ask these questions if you're listening to this. Don't ask the question of the miracle question or the daddy's watching over you or any of that stuff. I mean, you're
Yeah.
going to make people really uncomfortable. They're going to shut down and they're not going to come back to you because you don't get it. And you're not holding the space that you need to be holding for this situation, for this person.
And the research says they also won't try another therapist. Or if they do,
Yes.
it will be 5+ years. So you've chased them away from any kind of professional support, which isn't fair to
And
the
then
client.
it's not fair to the client. And they're handling this on their own and probably in an unhealthy way. And maybe that leads to increase in substance use or whatever the case may be. But we don't want to be turning clients away because we are uncomfortable. And if you are that uncomfortable and just don't get it, refer them to the person who can, because we want people to land in the right places. And I know you've mentioned this before, like grief therapists who are actually grief therapists, who have done the training, who have done the work. That's really important too.
It is. I was on a podcast with somebody else, and they're of the opinion that there shouldn't be specialties in a lot of therapy. And for some, anxiety, depression, okay, maybe we all deal with that. But don't hold yourself out as doing grief work if you haven't at least had some advanced training in it more than 5 stages. And don't talk about stages when someone's already died. Please stop.
I was going to ask you about that. So we can ruffle feathers on this podcast. I want us to talk about things that make people uncomfortable. Do you mind telling me about your thoughts on the 5 stages of grief?
Oh, so many thoughts. The 5 stages are fabulous if someone's dying. And I do work with people who are dying in their families. And so that is when you have some of those, although I don't use the exact words. I don't use denial. I use date of diagnosis, right? When someone's died, you are no longer doing anticipatory grief. Those stages were describing a dying person's experience and what the family is experiencing with them. You aren't experiencing that after someone has died. You may be sad. You probably will be. But that's not because you're in a stage. You might be angry, but that's not a stage. You've got all the emotions available to you. And if you don't have one of them, you're not doing it wrong, which is where they get in the way. People will come in and say, I'm here because my so-and-so said I'm doing this wrong. I'm smiling too much. I'm not mad. And they've got this whole list of things that people have tried to imply they should be doing. And what they really want to do is grieve their way with support for doing it that way. And those are my people.
Those are your people, for sure. And it's such a complicated subject, right? Because you can vacillate between emotions pretty quickly when someone's died or passed away, and anger, sadness, like all of those things could be happening at the same fucking time. Right. And they don't have to be linear.
They're not linear. It's like a horseshoe and everything just bounces back and forth like a ping pong ball, right? Anger can be frustration, can be short-tempered, can be, did you really just ask me that? And part of what you do with clients is teach them how to set boundaries, really firm boundaries, like K-rail on K-rail boundaries, and a little bit of tin over the top, like our bubbles right now. You want the boundaries so that they can decide how they want to do this and not have grief rules implied to them that they have to follow, because they don't.
That's so important to remember, that they get to do this their own way and setting boundaries for them. And
that's why I am authentic and why I do share my story and share it widely, because I didn't follow the rules. And when you don't follow rules, it means you're not letting other people impose their version of grief on you. And it's healthier. You're not as stressed. You don't have the inflammatory process that other people do. You can recreate your life faster because you're not trying to live your life for someone else's expectation.
Absolutely. That's so true. And your story is I don't imagine it's unique, but the interconnectedness is always fascinating to me. So wife 1 is connected to wife 2, who's connected to wife 3, essentially all of them, right?
Wife 3 knew both of them.
Right.
Yes.
So how has that been? How's that journey been for you? Do you ever get people who are like, why would you have married wife 2 who was taking care of wife 1?
That was therapist number 2 who said that.
Really? Just openly name that.
And then she also said, didn't you get her checked to see if she had any diseases? Okay. Don't say that either, folks. Okay.
Add that to the list, people. Like, don't fucking say that to your clients.
If someone has lost 2 of anybody, don't ask if they've gotten them pre-checked. They're not horses, and you don't take them to the vet. Right? We're not checking teeth. And just for the record, second wife died of Lewy body dementia, which you can't see.
Right.
It's literally all in your head. And It showed up after we were together. But, that implies that you only, can love somebody who's healthy after someone's died. And that's not true either.
No,
so
that's not true at all.
Don't say those things. Support someone in the decisions they've made. Be their cheerleader. That's what a griever needs, is a cheerleader as they try to navigate where they want to go from here. And if they make a mistake, they need you to not say, I told you should have waited a year. you say, okay, so what did we learn from that lesson? So we can, apply that to our book of things that you need in your how to do life after loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't shame your clients for their decisions. Like, they're not our decisions to make as it is. This is reminding me a lot of addiction work right now, of like relapsing and decisions of that nature. But we don't need to go down that road. I think this is really important. And this is a conversation that needs to be had more and more and more. And I know you're speaking all over the place about this. You're involved in so many communities. So it sounds like your interests are now shifting to dementia care and end of life that has to do with cognitive decline in some ways.
I do that as a parallel. That's my other
Okay.
side. Yeah, I run a dementia support group for the community. It's free. It's online. It's nationwide now. And that's on the third Saturday of every month. So anybody who wants to come just needs to let me know and we'll send you the link. Dementia is my other half of my world. So I do a lot of training and education on that because dementia affects 1 in 8 of us by the time we're 65. Look around, folks. If you're in a group with 10 people, one of you is going to have dementia. That's just the reality. And to be my usual open self, I do genealogy. I have a lot of dementia in my family. They ran my DNA, and don't you know, when I'm about 85, I will have Alzheimer's. So I'm going to have all the fun now and hope that my Alzheimer's will make me just a little more fun and a little more crazy. And I'm still going to have blue hair.
I like that reframe in perspective. And that's another topic and diagnosis that is not talked about very often. It's almost looked at as like, we are only going to talk about this in medical settings. We're not going to talk about this in the mental health field. Why do you think that is?
Because we're taught in some weird way by implication that if it belongs to neurology, it doesn't belong to us. And the reality is 50% of doctors never tell their patient that they have dementia, and they don't tell the family either. Right. And so that person is left not understanding what's going on. And then to make it better, they refer them to a therapist and say, I suspect depression, because dementia and depression can look alike until things advance a little more. And so we really have to know about it so we can ferret it out and get them back to a real neurologist, not that neurologist, to get a better understanding of what's going on so they can at least take care of business and make some plans. Absolutely. Because dementia is 100% fatal. So don't listen to all this stuff about the white flower and somebody's the first survivor. We're not there yet.
Yeah, I think that knowing the right neurologist and the right practitioners who really are able to assess and make appropriate referrals is also a really important piece of supporting people with struggles that are beyond our capacity or ability or understanding.
Yeah, we're not going to cross over and do the medical, but we should be able to provide the support. We should know enough about each of the dementias to be able to know what they're experiencing and get them what they need and reference what's going on in their world. And most therapists don't. And that's, grad school is not 5 years long, I get it, but grad schools, if you're listening, you need to be talking about it because they don't. I went to a great program. Dementia never came up.
I don't even know if death and dying came up in my grad school program.
It is now a choice class. You don't have to take it. My daughter just finished grad school, and don't you know, she did take the death and dying class and didn't tell me. I said, why didn't you tell me, my dear? And she said, because I knew you were going to go down there and raise hell, Mom, because it was all stages and how to help people with stages. And she was like, yeah, I needed to take it for an elective, but they were wrong. So I just told my friends to look your stuff up and then you can talk to them if they need it.
That's a pretty big endorsement.
Stages. Yeah, it is. It's nice when the kids do that. But my kids have had losses. They understand grief and loss.
Sure. Right? And, I'm trying to think right now about people who haven't. And that's got to be such a rarity of, I have never experienced a loss in my life.
I was doing a grief support group with one of my staff people, one of our junior staff people, who's turning into a rock star of sorts and taking on all kinds of stuff. And I said, you have to disclose your own losses because we're going to do, full disclosure in a lot of the activities. And we are the leaders. So we share our story. Right. You can choose which loss, but you have to share. And she said, but Jill, no one's ever died. I said, I didn't say it deaths. I said loss. You and your boyfriend just broke up last year. You were together 5 years. She said, but these people lost their spouses. I said, talk about it. See what happens. She used that as her loss. That group was all circled around her, and they incorporated that into the loss of their spouses. They could see the parallels. You just have to be able to acknowledge you've had losses. It could be your pet rock, your goldfish. You've had a loss.
Do you think a lot of people,
you've moved,
right? You've lost a sense of your identity or your safe place or your familiarity. we've talked about addiction being a loss in a way of like,
Oh,
even though it's unhealthy, you're losing a part of yourself. You're losing a part of your life.
you're
So
losing the people you did that with.
absolutely, the people, places, and things. So
Right.
do you think that most people associate talking about this stuff with death specifically, and they
Yeah.
lose sight of the fact that all of these other things are losses as well?
They lose sight of that. They lose sight of the fact that every loss counts. Oh, well, yeah, your brother died. I'm so sorry. But, he lived in another state or he was in the military. You didn't see each other that much. Oh, no, that's a loss,
For
right?
sure.
Your best friend, your pets are the biggest loss of all for many people, especially at the pandemic, because I think something like 35 to 40% of houses now have a pet, right?
Yep. Coming from a family that adopted a Shih Tzu in March, that was
I watched that.
but you're right though. Like our pets are such a big loss. They're such a source of like unconditional love, and they're around us all the time. I was having this conversation with a friend yesterday, and she said, "Why do you think that people take pet loss so hard?" And I mean, that is as far as I could think was just the unconditional love and the constant like connection. But I don't know if you can elaborate on that at all, but it feels real.
My joking response is our pets are the only ones who get so excited when we get home that they pee on the floor. Not even our friends do that for us.
That's very true.
It is. We are their people. We are their entire lives. And if you're a pet person, you get that. And they are the ones that, when I was teaching this morning, my friend decided that I'd talked long enough without his help, and he crawled up on my lap and he co-taught with me for half an hour.
Yeah.
They're an integral part of our lives. And if you're a real pet person, when you are leaving to go on vacation or to go on a trip, right, we say goodbye to them. We tell them we'll be back. We tell them to be good. It's a relationship.
And you worry about their outcome and their well-being while you're away. You're like,
Right.
they have the best pet sitter, but I'm concerned like something's going to happen to them. That's our whole world in a way if you're a pet person, and we are their whole world for sure. I've never seen someone get so excited as when I come home and our Shih Tzu is jumping relentlessly like to get picked up, and he will not stop until you pick him up, and he knows you're okay. And I'm
It's
like, this
uppy,
is
uppy, uppy,
unbelievable.
uppy, right?
Right. And they just love us so much, and it's such a sadness when they die, and that loss is really challenging because a lot of people I don't think can fully comprehend like it's just your pet, it's just your dog. Like you can be sad, but you have to move on from this pretty immediately. I hear that a lot.
Those are all the wrong words. No griever of any kind wants to hear move on,
Right.
or it's just, or why are you still sad? Not for pets, not for anybody. Pet loss is a very big deal. And if it's a single person with their pet, that was their whole world. That's
Yep.
who they built their life around. Right. You go to the
Absolutely.
grocery store and you think about what you're going to buy for them, just like you do if you've got kids at home, right?
For sure.
I got home last
And
night late and I stayed up until 1 a.m. making sure I cooked their food so it'd be ready for them today.
yep, you do everything in your world to support them, and you think about them when they're not around. And you think, I'm going to buy this pet this treat, and I can't wait to see how excited they are to have it when I bring it home. And then they look at it and they're like, I've had better.
Right. Our newest, second newest kid, Doug, who's about 14, and he can see sort of, and he can bark sort of, but he's got a collapsing trachea, so he makes a really loud noise. And he's next door right now, so we could talk without him interrupting us. His favorite toy is this squeaky, kind of furry sheep thing that sounds like a pig, and he carries it everywhere. Right, Mr. Tough Guy. He's 35 pounds of poodle. He looks like Wilbur in a sheep suit, but he carries that thing absolutely everywhere. And before that, it was his pink pig that he carried everywhere. And you can't have someone like that in your house and not go. They're really part of the fabric of who I am now.
Absolutely. I love the fact that you do this for all of these. You call them oodles? Is that it?
They're the oodles of poodles, yes.
Yeah. So what made you decide like this is where I'm going to spend my energy and I'm going to adopt these dogs who are really struggling and dying at the end of life?
It happened by accident. My first wife was very much a poodle person. We had lots of others. I had Nikita. I used to be a big dog person. And then we had several of them over the course of our years together. Fuzzy was the last one. She died at 17 a few years ago. And when Fuzzy was starting to go downhill, my wife Stacy looked at me and she said, because Fuzzy went to work with us, we got to have a transitional dog for the office. We can't just have Fuzzy die and not have Fuzzy too already there. And so she got in the car one day and she said, we're going to go out to some of the high kill shelters. I've identified who's got midlife poodles. That way you don't have yappy, barky, bitey, destructo dog, right? Yep. And we got Adele, who was just the most amazing creature. And she was about 10 at the time. and she fit in well. And then someone heard that we'd had her, and a dog was abandoned at an office with his eyes falling out. And so, because we already knew how to deal with a blind dog, he ended up at our house. And it just sort of morphed from there. So now there's a shelter here in our area who, when they have a poodle who is not in good shape, they will call us and say, we've got a dying dog. Would you come and get him and give him a good end of life? And that's what we do.
Because those dogs, people don't want those dogs, right? Like a lot of times they're not getting adopted.
They're getting euthanized.
They're getting euthanized. So you're providing some dignity and some love for their end of life and their transitions.
We've had an 18-year-old who lasted about 6 months, who went from underfed and starved to really healthy and then cancer. We had one whose parent was being placed in a skilled nursing facility, and the dog was older, and the family just said, just put the dog to sleep. And that vet's office called and said, this dog still has some life left. She's blind and she's deaf, but she's loving and she just wants a home. So she came home, and we put her in diapers with little bunnies and ducks all over them. And, they fit in, and they do. At the end of a day, when I'm doing grief work all day, I get to go outside and play with the dogs. And if it's a hot day, Fred puts him, breaks into the pool and goes swimming. And, we just, it makes the fabric of our lives a little bit brighter.
I love that. I really, really love that. That's such a beautiful, beautiful image. And it sounds like such a good representation of your journey with all of this too, to just say, hey, we're going to give love and dignity and respect to people and animals and relationships that are coming to an end.
And making the best ending, which is really what I am all about. Make the best ending and make the best relaunch after someone has died. And pets are someone's, not some things, folks. So just remember that.
I agree wholeheartedly. Also, do you have those terms taglined or trademarked? Those would be very good for everything that you're doing.
I really should, but yes,
should.
I use hashtag oodles and oodle mom. And I do use hashtag the Rebellious Widow, because that fits me too.
Just briefly before we talk about all the amazing things you're doing, the Rebellious Widow is one of the amazing things you're doing. And I'm looking at the book over your shoulder right now, and you sent me a copy so graciously after Hawaii. Do you want to talk about that for a minute? Just you writing that book and what that book is about?
That book is drawn from a series of blogs I wrote while both of my wives were sick and dying and after their deaths, and the process that I went through and the process they were going through, as well as some educational pieces, because I didn't have energy to talk to people individually. And then I looked at those, and my wife, Stacy, looked at them and she said, we got to do something with them. They're used a lot. People reference them a lot. They've helped 5 people get diagnosed with Lewy body dementia just because of being passed along. So they mean something. We need to do something with them. And I put them together, and they were 330 pages long. So I knew that wasn't going to work. And an editor very nicely said, Jill, nobody wants to hear your story. They want it to help them. So it's not an autobiography. It's got stories woven in, but it's how to prepare for a spouse's death or anybody, how to manage hospice, how to manage the end of life, what dying looks like, and then how to manage grief and come out on the other side. And on the website for it, it's actually got downloads for free that anybody can use for those processes. I love the way it came out. I'm really proud of it. I'm not one to, toot the horn, but I'm really proud of that book because it has helped a lot of people. And I now get, requests in the middle of the night, can you send a book out to? Because it helped me, right? And that's what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to say it's possible to be widowed, and it's possible to be happy again, and it's possible to not listen to those stupid widow rules, and it is possible for you to understand the dying process so it doesn't haunt you or cause PTSD. And you need to know that you manage hospice, they don't manage you, and you get to choose where you go after loss, which is a powerful thing. You get to throw that grief card down and remake your life if you want to. First wife was dying. I was working for CPS. I thought I'd be there for 40 years. By the time my second wife died, I was a business owner working full-time in my business. It really did. I remade my life in part because of their deaths.
That's so powerful.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great story. It's a powerful story. It's something that can be an example. I hope nobody else has to do that story, but there are lots of double widows and widowers out there. And some of them are kind of stuck, and some of them are, oh no, I want life again. I want to see people want life again.
My own grandfather just died a couple of months ago, and my grandmother, who was married to him for 50 years, I think, is now doing like a long distance relationship from New York with someone in North Carolina. She's 85. I love it.
Awesome.
And she's gotten some looks of like people saying, isn't it too soon? Like, don't you? And I'm like, she has one life. Let her be happy. Like, we are human beings who need connection. So I'm all about it. She'll call me and say, hey, I wanted to tell you about what we talked about this week. I might come down and visit you and him at the same time. I'm like, yes, please do that.
Take him out to dinner though, and make sure he's the right guy. You got to do
Well,
that
yeah,
thing,
I do
right?
need to screen him for sure
Right.
for her well-being. So, Jill, you have a ton of stuff, and I want you to just share where you can be found, how people can get connected to what you have to offer.
Well, The Rebellious Widow you can find on its very own website and read the first chapter too. And that is therebelliouswidow.com. Super simple. And then there's jilljohnsonyoung.com. No hyphens, no caps, just shove it all together. And that's got all the classes that I teach, which are all going to become evergreen products so that you can take them at any time. And they all come with NBCC CEs, and they come with access to me for 2 office hours for consultation. It's a nice, sweet deal there because I want people to do grief better. And you'll find stuff about the grief support group on there and all the links to all the other places on there. There's also resources there about every kind of loss imaginable. And if I hear of another one, I'll throw it on there, and all the dementias. So that you can, if you just need resources, pop on there, you'll find them there. And you'll find links to other places like Private Practice Grief on there and other kinds of things. And then the podcasts that I'm on are on there so that you can take a listen and see if you think I'm your person, or if you need to go find David Kessler, because you may be a Kessler fan, and that's okay too. There's room for everybody. Yep.
Jill has a lot of resources. If you ever need to hire someone to speak about grief, I recommend it in complete confidence.
It's recess for me.
She enjoys it. She makes it fun. I've never laughed during a training talking about something that is really hard for people. So I really, really appreciated that. And I appreciate you being on here. Jill is a force in the therapeutic communities. I really recommend checking her stuff out. And for you listening at home, please feel free to download and subscribe to the All Things Private Practice podcast. You can find more of my coaching and podcast and retreat information at allthingspractice.com, or join our Facebook group, All Things Private Practice, where we try to be authentic, talk about social justice, ruffle feathers, curse a lot, and talk about really hard conversations. So I really appreciate everyone listening. And Jill, I really, really appreciate having you on today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. I'm so glad I'm in your group.
Thank you. Me too.